Mr. Smith was born on October 7th of 1937. He was the firstborn in his family and has a younger sister and brother. Mr. Smith's father worked in a grain mill and his mother stayed at home to take care of the children. Being born in October, Smith was sent to school when he was just 5 years old. He said he was picked on because he was so small and young. This was one of the reasons that Mr. Smith joined the military. He wanted to be tough enough to not be picked on. Mr. Smith grew up when World War II was being fought. He said that he only realized that Germans were also humans after the war was over. In his adolescence, Smith said he played Cowboys and Indians, along with other games, with his friends in his neighborhood. Around this time, when he was 15, Mr. Smith put his faith in Christ. He remains a devout Christian to this day. After graduation from high school, Smith worked for 3 years in a machine shop and then enlisted in the U.S. Marines. Mr. Smith didn't have any immediate family in the military, only an uncle in World War II and a cousin in the Korean War. Mr. Smith was recruited out of the Boston area to join the Marines. He enlisted in the Marines because he wanted to fight, and through experience he did. He and others were brought down on trains to Parris Island. Smith said the first 2 days were fabulous. He thought that training was going to be great until he arrived. Then he said things went downhill. Mr. Smith's drill sergeants all fought in the Korean War, and Mr. Smith said they all were completely nuts. They were determined to prepare Smith and the others for war more than they had been prepared. So, tell us about your early days of training.
Well, either I was listening to a lecture, I was running, I was doing push-ups, or it was way dark late at night and I was asleep. They were required to give us a certain amount of free time to read and write letters and answer our mail and stuff like that before we went to bed.
In basic boot camp, Smith said he was either running, doing calisthenics, taking notes on a lesson, or sleeping. They were only allowed 2 minutes a day to write and read letters. Smith said it was tough, and from his group, 78 men started boot camp and only 49 of them graduated. Smith was one of those who made it. Smith said the Marines didn't want to make him special or advanced, so he never attended any advanced training for the Marines. There was no war going on when he was in the Marines. He felt like a glorified cigar store Indian and didn't see much action.
The Marines were not much interested in making me special or advanced or whatever. They figured out in the first week at Parris Island that I was a Christian, and it is military propaganda, belief that when the Christian religion of any variety is only for wimps. And if you're a real man, you don't need that stuff. You're tough enough to wear whatever the Marine Corps wears, or whatever the paratroops wear, or the Green Berets wear, or whatever. You don't need religion. Religion's only for wimps.
During his time there, he found that he did lots of hard work. However, he said that his job was to feel miserable and look pretty. He served 3 years of active duty and did his 3 years in the reserve and then left the Marines. Smith's military obligation ended in 1963. This was the time America started to send troops to Vietnam. He was already attending a college in Massachusetts. He was concerned because the college was pro-communist college. He graduated college in 1965 and didn't even attend graduation. He was mailed his diploma. After that, he left to join the U.S. Army, specifically to go to Vietnam. For the Army, Smith chose to become advanced. He attended basic training, combat training, parachute school, and other advanced training. In his first year in Vietnam, Smith was a scout platoon leader in the regular army. He would snoop and scoop around. If he found someone, he would call in their locations and leave. In the Army, after training, Mr. Smith also served as an instructor for the Rangers at Fort Benning for 1 year. Smith felt that in the Army, he was able to do something practical, and after a certain amount of time, he became fairly good at his job. Throughout his service under both branches, he says that the Marines required more work. Very few dropped out of the Army basic training, and in the Marines, 35 out of the 78 left. Overall, Smith enjoyed working in the Army rather than in the Marines.
Smith described Vietnam as being hot, wet, and muddy between October and April, and dry, dusty, and hot from October till April. He said it didn't matter where you were, it was always hot and miserable. Smith saw all of French Indochina except North Vietnam while he was over there. He would be sent to areas to meet missionaries on his vacations. He wanted to become a missionary over there after the war, but didn't because there was a bounty on his life. During his service, he used weapons such as the Russian SKS. The SKS was the standard weapon of the North Vietnamese Army. This weapon sounds very different from the American M16 because it doesn't fire as fast and it has a heavier cartridge. These differences made it easy to hear who was firing the shots. Mr. Smith was also a member of the Special Forces. During his service under those forces, he had very little downtime and had to become very aware of his surroundings. Some of the men he was fighting with were not on their side. The way he found out if they were from the other side was when they tried to shoot him in the back during a gunfight or tried to roll a grenade under him. These types of situations soldiers went through caused them to become very paranoid.
So if you can, could you describe an ordinary day in the military stations that you were at?
There were no ordinary days. It was, 85% teetotal boredom, 10% hyper alertness, as in walking around like this, and 5% killing or dying. Usually I didn't die.
During his time over in Vietnam, Smith held off a Viet Cong battalion for 25 minutes all by himself. When in war, Smith said that things needed to be done the hard way because it is an occupational hazard. Smith was injured during his time in the military. He was on the last part of the phase that ended a 6-day patrol, and he was very tired. One of his fellow soldiers had left his rifle at the last break they were on. Smith and a few others had to go back to get it. Being very tired, Smith fell asleep on the way back. They were in an accident, and Smith had received 2 smacks to the head, a broken shoulder, shattered elbow, 2 broken wrists, and 2 broken ribs, one which was located over his right kidney. Smith also survived 3 gunshot wounds, which he described as clippings when he was over in Vietnam. Mr. Smith first heard that the Vietnam War was over when he was halfway home from a civilian job, listening to the 5 o'clock radio news. Smith did not come back to America right away. He came back like the rest of them did, one at a time. He left the jungle of Vietnam on July 7, 1969. On the 8th, he spent his time processing out, collecting his stuff, and getting shipped out to where he needed to go. The rest of the 8th and 9th, Smith spent his time flying home. At 10:30 on July 9th, he was walking down the street of Seattle. After he came back, Smith took correspondence courses where he was active for a few weeks here and there. To decompress himself, he played war games that included role-playing. He would be the commander of a platoon trying to move to a different location. Smith married a Vietnam veteran who served for a year and a half in Vietnam as a nurse advisor to a Vietnamese civilian hospital. The two of them met in Bible college after the war and have been married for 43 years. Smith is also involved with the Special Forces Association and the Disabled American Veterans. Smith has never received any American medals, but he has received 3 Vietnamese medals. He has the South Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry twice and the Cross of Gallantry with Palm once. Thank you, Mr. Smith, for your service. We greatly appreciate everything you have done for our country.